Hey, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you as we talk about public education, as we talk about the Department of Education, as we talk about the protections our children will and will not have in the education system. What about civil rights for children? Yeah, they do need them. In fact, it was the children who were marching for civil rights 60, 70 years ago. It was a child, the lynching of a child, the really the defiling of a child of Emmett Till that kicked off the modern civil rights movement. So, yes, suffer not these little children. Yes, I have to have a twisted phrase, Pastor Thurston and Pastor Hatch. But something is going to happen here because we've seen affirmative action struck down by the Supreme Court on the public and private sides. We've seen DEI thrown out by this administration. One was the root, the other is the fruit. Of course, affirmative action, when that went down, you knew everything else was going to go down, and people immediately started losing these DEI jobs when the affirmative action decisions on the public and private sides of universities uh, when affirmative action was struck down. We saw DEI leaving. Now it's just more explicit. And with that goes, many people have been writing almost 60 years of civil rights gains, but not so fast. If we're vigilant, if we know what's happening, then we have an opportunity to change things. So let's talk about the civil rights protections that people do and do not have. Now, ProPublica did an investigation. It's the name of this article, the name of this investigation is the Trump administration on education. The Department of Education is lifting a pause on some civil rights probes, but not for race or gender cases. Jennifer Smith Richards and Jody Cohen are the reporters on this piece. The U.S. Department of Education told employees that it would lift its month-long freeze on investigating discrimination complaints at schools and colleges across the country, but only to allow disability investigations to proceed. That means that thousands of outstanding cases, complaints filed with the Department's Office for Civil Rights related to race and gender, most of which are submitted by students and families, well, they will continue to sit idle. Now, think about this. Even preschoolers are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from school. We've all seen the horrifying images of children, 5 and 6 years of age, Black children, who have been cuffed, well, zip tied, because they don't even have cuffs that small, but I'm not going to put it past them. They'll come up with them. And they've been put in the backs of police cars, Dr. Myers. I know as an educator, that has got to be so disturbing to you. It's disturbing for all of us, but we see this school to prison pipeline. And if there are no complaints when you have teachers who have social biases, what are we to do? We have no space now. We know that racism is real, but we know that sexism is real, Dr. Myers. Very real. How is it that girls up until 12 years of age have all of the confidence to function in the mathematical and scientific spaces, but somehow at 12 years of age, the data shows that changes? Why? What happens to these dreams that crush? They're not deferred, they're crushed. Do our children, do their families have any recourse? Let's talk about this. Here on the Santita Jackson Show, we've got, you are a pastor and an educator, the Ma'afa Redemption Project. New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch. And, you teach these kids on even at the university level. So I want to know what your thoughts are. Attorney Darrell Jones, of course, you host your own radio show along with attorney Barbara Arnwine at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time every Tuesday on WOL. but you're the chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition, in addition to being a brilliant civil rights attorney. And you and Barbara Arnwine are really the preeminent lawyers and advocates in the voting rights space. Dr. Lakeisha Myers, preeminent educator, former elected official. We're so glad that she is with us, looking healthy, being great. I'm so glad that you're here. We love you, Dr. Lakeisha Myers. That's right. We love you. We're so glad that you're back with us. And Pastor Stephen Thurston, Reverend Stephen Thurston. And you've experienced education. You've gone to school. Were you at Oxford or Cambridge?
Oxford.
Okay. And you are a Morehouse man. So you've, like my sister, you've seen education on different continents, and you've seen how they treat education, Dr. Myers, differently in different places. In fact, that was my sister's concentration when she was getting her PhD on global economic policy. It's amazing to go to the Nordic countries, um, to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and you turn on the radio and you can learn another language. Like we listen to music. So, what do you make of this? What's happening, Dr. Myers? Talk to me. With civil rights, and we're covering disabilities. That's important because they withdrew that. They said, no, we're going to cover disabilities, but now racism and sexism, nah, we're not going to touch that. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, you can't pick and choose which pieces of the law that you want to. Daryl is laughing because he knows I'm telling the truth. You pick and choose which pieces of the law you want to follow, allow. So I believe there's room for litigation there on a whole lot of fronts. But one thing I would say is that I think a lot of folks don't understand, quite frankly, what the Department of Education does. And when I say folks don't understand, it's people who live at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They have no idea what is going on at the Department of Education and a lot of the title funding that they utilize. When you talk about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that has been, then was the Race to the Top and all these other things, Every Student Succeeds Act now that it is. So there's a lot that comes under the umbrella of education. When it comes to race in education, you're talking about stripping away not just complaints against educators, which I will go on the record and say again for folks that don't know this, that if you look at the population of teachers in America, more 99.9% of the time you will have white female teachers that are under the age of 35. That's who the core of the teaching population is. So when you talk about correlating that with looking at suspension rates you mentioned earlier, and students that are younger and younger being suspended, you have to look at the bulk of who we're talking about that are the professionals in the classroom and what level of bias, number one, that they come to the table with, and also how we adultify children. So that's a big piece of that as well. And when you look at and you drill down at those numbers, because the Department of Education has an office, or they had an Office of Civil Rights within the department.
Why was that necessary?
It was necessary because looking at some of the complaints that existed, they weren't just about I'm being mistreated by XYZ teacher and I need to have a pathway to get some reprieve in that respect. It was also because my child was being discriminated against because they're in a wheelchair and the school was built in, let's say, 1885, and there's no adequate wheelchair lift in the school. So now public schools may have to send your child to a place that has an elevator lift or a place for them to be educated, or they are violating the terms of their individualized education plan, which is again against the law. So all of these things are happening. So it's a lot of intersections that exist when you talk about what happens under the umbrella of the Department of Education. So when you talk about the Office of Civil Rights suspensions, that made my spidey senses go up because Milwaukee Public Schools within the last 7 years had an Office of Civil Rights, decree that came down that talked about the fact that even though our school district was predominantly Black, we still over suspended students, many of them Black girls, for subjective things like disrespect. What does that mean? What does that mean? If the teacher said I was disrespectful, what does that mean? There were no real ramifications of how I could be referred to the office for disrespect. Is it because I rolled my eyes? Is it because I, did that? What was it? Did I curse you out? All of those things could be coming under the guise of disrespect,
Or
and
did
they're
I challenge?
varying extremes.
Did I challenge an answer? I mean, because
That I challenge, exactly, that I
I mean,
challenge an
your
answer or
intellect.
challenge what I'm being taught because I
Yeah.
have a retort for that from what I'm being taught at home. So those things are all things that fall under the guise of the Office of Civil Rights when you look at that respect of it. So you talk about them drilling down on the disability piece of it, because I think that is a more for a lot of children, it would be a more tangible, and Daryl can correct me if I'm wrong. When you look at children who have disabilities, they're thinking about physical disabilities, that we teach students that have physical disabilities. When you think about the work that Hillary Clinton did early in her career, working for Children's Defense Fund, one of the things was that she was a tester for children who were being left at home during the day because they could not go to school, because they were like, we don't want a child that's in a walker here. We don't want a child that's in a wheelchair here. Not even to include intellectual disabilities that exist. When children are behind the eight ball and they have traumatic brain injuries and all these other things that cause them to be further and further behind academically. So we haven't even scratched the surface of that piece yet. But I think when you look at this, the other part of it is going back to the race piece. In the state of Wisconsin, you have school districts that have been called out for not even doing the correct numbers, for reporting the correct numbers of racial incidences that happen on a peer-to-peer basis. All of that gets reported to the Office of Civil Rights at your state level. And then if it goes further, it goes to the federal level as well. So now you have no reprieve outside of private litigation, which is an issue. How many parents do we know that can afford a Daryl Jones if he didn't give you the family and friends discount that could represent you, in mass on a wider scale, to then go take this all the way to the Supreme Court? Most people don't have funding like that to do that. If I'm just, a regular parent and this is an issue, we had a parent that I know personally, and that was in another school district here in Wisconsin, where the teacher asked asked the students in an assignment to play slave games, or it was something about being an enslaved person and playing games. It was something crazy like that. And she had to escalate that to our state level and get some reprieve there. So if there's no one to answer to, if you live in a state like Oklahoma or Florida or somewhere like that, then where do you go? Your next step would be to go to the federal government. But if they're not taking those cases, they just sit there in limbo until you get a new president. And they may never be heard unless you go and you sue your school district privately. School districts are businesses. They're going to try to kill you with as much paper and process that the law will allow, so you'll never get to that point. And eventually they may, if they're smart, try to settle with you out of court, even if it gets that far.
Well, I wonder if a new president, certainly presidents do make a difference, but when you've got Governor DeSantis who's creating his own Doge office,
Right.
I don't think we have enough of an appreciation for how important state politics are, because that's how the country was constructed. It's a delicate balance between state and federal power. Because DeSantis and Pritzker and everybody else, they all have the right to create their own version of things, version of what America should be like. It's going to be very interesting. Well, let me go over to you, because she called you out. She promised it. She promised that she would, Attorney Daryl Jones. Friends and family. I got it. To be fair, Charles Houston and Thurgood Marshall and the like, they did have the NAACP behind them. So they had organizational support, Constance Baker Motley and all of that. So I'm trying to get you off the hook a little bit.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, Santita. And Dr. Myers is 100% on the mark with what she's laid out, and the importance of having the Department of Justice involved in the OCR, Office of Civil Rights, and overseeing all that goes on. One of the things in terms of looking at it, One of the things we do as a society, and one of the benefits that we have from the Department of Justice is this. We anticipate that when you're in a local government, there can be a lot of local issues that go on, and a lot of people know each other and try to help each other and all this other stuff to smooth things out so no one really gets in trouble and no one really finds out about it. You elevate that to the state level, it's still there. Yeah, it's a broader sense. It's a little more difficult to do, but it's still there. You bring in the Department of Justice because you want this independent voice to come in. And you want this independent voice to come in and do this investigation to this claim that's occurring in this system. And what the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, and the Department of Justice is able to do is after they do the investigation, they can then try to, if it's necessary to bring a lawsuit, they can bring a lawsuit. If it's necessary to work out some type of agreement, so that folks have an agreement as to this is how you're going to handle this. This is what our findings are. This is what everybody's going to do. A consent agreement, right? This is what everyone's going to do in this type of situation. That's the value of the Department of Justice being at that higher level, looking down on everything else that's occurring. There's less of a chance of them, being influenced by the individual players that are involved. So when we get to the point of doing what Pam Bondi, who is the U.S. Attorney General now for the United States, is doing, is that their initial thing was, we're not going to do any investigations, put all the investigations that you're doing on hold, stop it. So the young lady who has been assaulted and believes that she's being discriminated against based on her sex or whatever factors, that stops. The African American that believes that he's being discriminated against, that she's being discriminated against, that stops. The same with the LGBTQIA person, all of that, it all stops. And as Dr. Myers so correctly pointed out, and that's also people with disabilities, those that are differently abled. Those investigations, when they took office January the 20th, all of them stopped. All of them stopped. And so it takes so much courage for a student to step forward and say, this is occurring to me. Because when you're dealing with those young kids and those impressionable minds, you know that the other kids are going to be, it's not going to be a kind and gentle thing that they're going to go through. It's going to be a lot of pressure and a lot of animosity that goes on. And so when you start adding to that this layer that there will not be DOJ protection for these kids, there will not be DOJ protection for the parents. The question then becomes, does it become just open season because there's no ramifications that are occurring and there's no big brother, no one that's overseeing the actions that are occurring in these schools? That's the big concern, I think, that flows from all this. And that's one of the areas where we're extremely concerned. I mean, it's great that they're doing what they've been paid to do, and that is to do the part with dealing with people with disabilities. But they need to spread it out and do what they're supposed to do with the Department of Justice and the OCR and investigate all of these claims and do it fairly. Interestingly, and I'll stop on this last point, Santita. Interestingly, what they do want to investigate now, what they are pushing for the investigations, they want to push cases where white kids are being discriminated against, right? Where the policies are saying that's only for blacks or only for Latinos or only for marginalized, and therefore the whites aren't a part of that marginalized group. Therefore, we're going to investigate this case to see why you're not allowing the white children to benefit from the discrimination that the other groups have experienced. That's what it's a horrific situation that we're in.
Pastor Stephen Thurston, I mean, because you're catching this on the ground, and I'm wondering what parents, because you do have hostile teachers. You do have, we have hostile workplaces, we have hostile schools. I mean, it seems like we're boxing parents and children in. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have, and with this school to prison pipeline, with Black children and brown children, Black children in particular, though, being imminently suspendable, expellable, if you will. Mm-hmm. This is not just in my mind. Yeah. I'm not imagining things. You have, as I mean, Dr. Myers just showed you the population. And I'm gonna say, and there are many good white teachers, many well intentioned. But there was something our parents, I will say this, take this in the right way, everybody. They grew up in Jim Crow America. They had black teachers who had been blocked from going to many places, but they were like you. They the PhDs. You had the people who had very developed minds or very developed skill sets, and they got the best of the best. Our children are not necessarily getting that. I had Dr. Sonia Whitaker from Push Excel on the show a few weeks ago, well, a couple of weeks ago, and she said, you've got to go into your child's school to find out which teacher is certified and which is a substitute. I said, wow, I never even thought about that. She said, yeah, because every teacher in every classroom is not certified.
And the poorer you are, the more likely you are to have a series of substitutes, especially in the younger grades. Remember, K
Absolutely.
through 3, you learn how to read. 3 through 12, you're reading to learn. So if you didn't get the basics and have a certified teacher in the beginning, you're further and further behind. And that's unfortunately based on zip code at this point.
Absolutely, what always has been. I mean, now it's just even more pronounced. See, the quiet part is being said out loud, Pastor Thurston. I mean, what do we do?
This kind of beckons back to the whole with all deliberate speed. If y'all are old enough to remember that infamous phrase from Brown versus Board of Education, which became the legal shield behind which segregation is hid while resistance to integration hardened. This whole measured approach and careful consideration about these issues, there are 12,000 cases currently that were backlogged when President Trump took over. 3,500 of those cases were for African Americans. And so holding those, suspending those, it's psychological warfare.
Why do you say that?
Because it creates this whole, it's damage psychologically to have students, parents, families experience hurt, harm, danger, and then tell them to hurry up and wait.
Maybe it's not, you're imagining things.
Right. There's gaslighting. There are all of those elements that are at play. And the goal is to transform legitimate grievances into exhaustion, turn our hope into cynicism, and our righteous anger into despair. And so it's this pushback. Don't touch them. Let's make white people the victim.
So what do you do? I mean, because you're in the heart of the community, but you're also on the road a great deal, and you also spend time out of the country. And you know that countries that are moving forward, Dr. Myers, countries that are ambitious to be bigger and better, they emphasize education.
Yeah.
They're building schools, and they honor teachers. I'm not saying they pay them everything, but what they should. But what they do is and there was a time in the Black community and I would say in the broader American community, when teachers were honored.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening. So when the members of your congregation come to you, I mean, because you're in a neighborhood that's a mix.
Yeah.
You've got upper middle class, and working class and poor people.
Yeah, all of that.
And they're all in your church.
Yes.
What do you say to them now? I mean, because a lot of our children will say, I don't want to go to school. And guess what? They will find a way not to go.
Sure. Yeah. I try to put a constant barrage of positive examples in front of them of what can be, what could be. I try to teach and have actively engaged our membership in understanding learning policy, education policy. When your dad made me come work for Push after New Covenant called me, he put me in the education department. And he said, you're going to get down here and you're going to learn education policy. And I thought he was crazy. But all of these years later, I really appreciate it because I have a different lens and I'm able to engage with students and with parents and even educators from that perspective of understanding policy. This is what y'all are seeing on the surface. This is the presenting issue. This is the real play at hand. And so being able to decompose some of these issues and make it palatable for, again, parents and students to help them see the longer goal, helps them to kind of overcome some of that apathy that will set in when you're constantly being barraged with all of these obstacles to press forward in life educationally.
You know, Pastor Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch, because in the education system, that is where our children are. They're made and they're broken. I mean, you're affirmed. You know, when you do well in a class, that's affirming. When you're struggling in a class, that's tough. But when you have a teacher who sees something else in you, who might pull you aside and give you the extra help that you need, that's affirming too. Um, and you have teachers who bring their personal biases into the classroom. Right? People are human. Should you do it? No. Do they do it? Yes. And you know, and we're living in an America today where people are saying and doing any and everything. They're saying and doing the most. Goodness gracious. So you got to tell me, I'm going to get to you, Daryl Jones, before you go. But Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch, what recourse and what role should the church play? Should the church start opening up churches? I mean, because we've been talking with Dr. Malvo and Dr. Whitaker about doing what we did at Push. Oh, Pastor Thurston, this is before you even, well, this is just as you were born, and even before. On Saturdays, we went to school. You know, and our Jewish friends go to Hebrew school. You are not going to have this discussion on CRT in the Jewish home. And as a matter of fact, they don't want you to touch their history. They're like, no, no, no. I teach my children who they are. I don't let you do that. You're not allowed to do that. And Carter G. Woodson told us, don't hand your child over to the oppressor. Don't do that. So, I mean, talk to me, because I'm directing this question to you this way, because you've got the Ma'afa Project, and you are helping our children, our young people, to see who they are after they have been barraged with all that they're not. So what do you see when you have a Department of Education, which they're trying to end? There's no recourse. What do you tell the parents in your community and the children, the young people?
Yeah, well, I think the panel is diagnosed. I mean, we're in a real pickle here. The Department of Education is going to be dismantled, and all that means has already been described. That there was not going to be any recourse from the state level for any investigations about racial discrimination, which is really a major part of what this is all about. And so, our people at this point are groping for a path forward. Now, of course, we're going to fight all of that. You're going to fight it in the courts. Of course, that would matter if we don't go headlong into authoritarianism, which appears that we're going. So the courts are going to be ignored at some levels if we continue on the political path. So that's not going to mean what it normally meant, and that is that the court would have the last word. Not necessarily, they're not controlling guns. And that's what really matters in authoritarianism. So we're in a difficult place. And we have to kind of analyze the place we were in before the authoritarians took over the federal government in the last month. And that is, we had, as has been described here, basically white women teaching as a white woman's jobs program, which in many cases was disastrous for our children. All of the research suggested that it mattered who stood in front of these children, their cultural competency, and dare I say, as a preacher, their love for these children. All of that mattered with the craft of teaching. And so we were not getting a great product out of the public school system before we got this crisis where the Department of Education is going to be dismantled. And so I think that you kind of hit on it, bringing up Carter G. Woodson. And I think the panel kind of hit on it. We have to go back into some real, while we fight the good fights externally, some real internal community building. So does that mean Saturday schools and churches? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean looking at Black private and charter school operators? Yes. Does that mean insisting that African Americans take control of the educational process for our children? Yes. And so, it all of the above, we're almost back to some of that age old, dialogue about Booker T versus WEB. I mean, Booker T, of course, always represented internal building, internal focus, developing your own institutions, and taking responsibility on the issue of education for educating your own children.
See, I never understood why we needed to choose between the two, because I felt that, when Booker T. Washington said, cast down your buckets where you are, I'm like, I agree with that. When W.E.B. Du Bois said, okay, the halls of academe, they're for us too. I mean, because we have abandoned the trades, which I think is a huge mistake. Huge. I mean, I'm looking at Martha Stewart, who left being a stockbroker to being a cook. Huh? Yeah, I said it. You can unmute yourself. I mean that. That's what she did. And we have no respect for that. I mean, Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress was made by Anne Lowe, who was a Black couturier. I think one of my best girlfriends, she would do my hair. We did each other's hair because we didn't have relaxers, and so we were trying to figure out how to iron out our hair with the blow dryer. We worked it out. But she became quite great, not good, at doing hair. And she was in the school of business. I was like, have you thought about becoming a beautician? Because now you got people who they were making appointments with her. and the richest Black woman in Washington, D.C. was Liz Nolan, who had Natural Motion Beauty Salon. Yep, snaps to all y'all who were in D.C. in the 80s and the 90s and the 70s. If you got your hair done, you went to Liz Nolan. She owned blocks in Washington, D.C. So we got to do all of that. But Attorney Darrell Jones, before you go, I want correctional officer for the lockdown. He says, I still have flashbacks from a 5th grade incident. Hear this, Dr. Myers. When my teacher removed all the females and lined all of us, the males, to face the blackboard and had us each open our shirts to look for gang medallions. I can see that. And I can see our children having no recourse.
But I think one of the thing, I think we're saying different things to accompany the same sentiment.
That's
I think when we start off, you talk about what Dr. Hatch just said, what you said about Martha Stewart leaving corporate America to become a cook and to have this lifestyle brand. When you talk about Liz Nolan, when you talk about the trades in general, I think there's a yes and piece that goes with that. When you look at it, the first thing that Dr. Hatch talked about was, what do we need to do? You asked the question about what churches should be investing in, what the plan should be for our community. I think number one, the plan for our community should be, yes, we need Freedom School on Saturday and during the week. If your church, you have a building, is it open 7 days a week? And if not, why? That's the question that you need to ask. If you are a Black institution, sororities, fraternities, Masonic lodges, all of these things, we need to work together to do that and build the institution to talk about these things, to give your children extra options. Because a lot of my education didn't just come from the schoolhouse. It came from my house at the kitchen table with my parents, who said, you need to have a plan by the time you leave here. And both of them were educators. Mm-hmm. So they were like, okay, military is an option. Okay, if you want to go into teaching, that is an option as well. But figure out what it is that you want to do. They also gave me the room and had the ability to do that. So when we talk about abandoning the trades at certain points, at certain times in our collective history, we ran away from those things because we wanted to embrace more white collar positions or professional positions, if you will, that weren't in the service industry. We look at those. Martha had a choice. She could
She
have
had a
been
choice, but you know, but let me say
but
this.
that's the thing. We're trying to build the option to give our children more choices,
But that's what I'm
and not
saying.
limit them in that aspect. I think
But
that's
my thing is, many of us, let's be real, because it's a class issue. We condescend to the trades, and it's a
oh,
problem.
absolutely. And I don't think it's just in general to the Black
No.
community. I think we have done that as
We
a
have done that, but I'm talking about Black people right now, marginalized people who have reduced options. See,
yes, absolutely.
Going downtown and getting a job now ain't no option.
Right.
That's off the table now. And I'm seeing, when I'm trying to get my pipes done.
Hey, I called the man for a toilet and it was $250. He was in there 20 minutes. I was upset, but I had to pay the man.
No. I'm making another point. I'm saying there was a time when I could find Black tradesmen to do that work. I can't find them.
Absolutely. Right.
And that, for me, when we brought 38,000 Ukrainians into the United States at the beginning of the conflict into Chicago. No one talks about that. When I looked at them, because see, we're in Chicago, we have the greatest concentration of Polish people of any place outside of Warsaw. They come here having being trained in the trades. And so when they say that they can bring these people from Eastern Europe in here, yeah, there's a reason they can, because they have gotten that background. And I'm saying, I don't want us.
And we've been systematically disinvested in, especially inner city communities. I can't speak for Chicago, but I can speak for Milwaukee. When the plumbers union moves way past the bus line and nobody can get there.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yes.
All I'm saying is, there's a vocational track, there's an academic track, and we need to respect them both.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you see more of that now.
Yeah.
The respect returning of that now because of the reality that we are in. But I'm just still looking at us as an internal community. When we look at that, and when you talk about people, the other point I wanted to make was that you made mention of the Jewish community and how you can't teach their history. However, everybody must learn their history as well. We passed a bill in Wisconsin where funding was given to make sure that you had to be taught about the Holocaust at least 3 times through your K through 12 experience.
But you know why they push that? Because they think enough of themselves coming out of these Saturday schools, coming out of their Hebrew schools. We have some rebuilding.
A whole lot of rebuilding,
which is what,
when it falls on deaf ears, when we tried to pass it here, it was like, oh well, we don't want to.
Well, but that's because we're not relevant to these kids and into the families. We have to rebuild that. We do, and we can't condescend to people, which is part of the problem. But I know you got to go, Attorney Jones. So I wanted you to make your statement, really, and thank you for staying over just a little longer.
No. Thank you, Santita. And I really enjoyed the exchange that you and Dr. Myers had going on. One of the things that I wanted to leave as sort of my parting words is that when we're talking about the Saturday schools, and Dr. Myers touched on this, we're not just talking about churches doing this. Any organization or entity can do the Saturday schools. And let's understand, when we talk about Saturday schools, we're not just talking about teaching the history, although that's a part of it. You can also teach the trade. You can have plumbers come in. You can have other professionals that are in those professions come in, that are in those trades come in. The truck drivers come. All of that come in and open up the world so they can see the possibilities of what's there. Because all of it is honorable work, and we got to be certain that we honor all of the professions that are there. But I also wanted to push on this, Santita. One of the things, if you were asking me the way forward with what we see happening from the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, and what we thought we were going to have in place in terms of having a fair umpire to be certain that people were being treated correctly and fairly, that's not going to happen. So let's not even begin to think in the world that it's going to happen. It's not going to happen. What our focus, I think, now has to become is becoming members of the local boards of education, so that we're at that table making those decisions. What we have to focus on now is becoming some of the members of the General Assembly that sit on the committees that overview the budgets for the State Board of Education. All of that now is where we need to really focus to be certain that we're trying to maximize the protection. Because remember, when we opened this up, we said that the local folks, right, the local Board of Education is where all the heat really is. That's where the rubbers meet in the road. And then, they're all in circular there and in bed with one another there, protect each other there. So we want to try to get in there and break that up. The state level would be the next level. We can also access that right now so that we're able to get there. We may not be able to do anything on the federal level for the next 3 years or 4 years. But once we can have that impact on those two levels, I think that, it well builds not just for today, but for the future as well, for what we need to do and what we need to have in place for generations to come, Santita.
WOL 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Barbara Arnwine and Daryl Jones, you've got to check out their show. Sending you so much love and thank you so much for this today.
Thank you. Back at all of y'all. Take care.
Oh, bye-bye. I'm looking for, and you know what, I think you might have a client because indeed, I saw you correctional officer for the lockdown. You want to talk about the past trauma. I mean, because to be lined up on the board like that is a horrible thing. And I can see when I think of these little children, Pastor Hatch, who we are seeing, preschoolers, they're being put in the backs of police cars. This is happening to us on a regular. And as Dr. Myers talked about the attitude, the eye rolls. Okay. Now, should our children be rolling their eyes, sucking their teeth, popping their necks? No. And do we need, because there was a time when you were graded on your behavior, and that we need to bring that back.
Deportment.
Absolutely. That's very important, because that's why, otherwise you could just go on and sit behind a laptop and learn your lesson. You're supposed to behave a certain way. That's why when you saw Elon Musk's child misbehaving. Now, people, I know I'm going a little bit off the reservation here, but I don't care what you feel about Trump. He was disrespectful to an adult. He was disrespectful, and he needed to be corrected in front of the whole world, because he was not right. And what we all
probably repeating what was happening at his house too.
And I'm sure he was, but he was out of order, and that lets you know that his father's out of order, that he's from a house that's out of order, and that to me is a problem. I don't have to agree with your politics, but bad manners are there's never any excuse for that. Never any excuse. That child was out of order. Out of order. And that's where you see my finger up in the air. Yeah. And I come from there. Yeah, I come from that part. I'm like, what's this child doing? And I don't agree with anything that they are doing, but I absolutely don't agree with that. And this is what we're dealing with, but I would not have dealt with a child without love. And that's what we're looking at, Pastor Thurston. A lot of there is no love for our children. And even for the children who are struggling, who are white and poor. If you are poor in this society, I don't care what color you are, you got a problem. You're behind the eight ball. Look at how they treat these white folks in Appalachia and in poor communities. This is horrible. I saw this this professor at the Stern School of Business at NYU who said, you know what, we need to have, he has a podcast. I'm going to look for him. Moderates, Raging Moderates. I'm going to find him. He said, wait a minute. Let's keep it real. You see democracy in this country if you are wealthy. The more money you have, the more democratic America gets for you. Now, that's not what America's supposed to be. Pastor Thurston, we're closing the gates for people to become who God sent us here to be. What and why did Reverend put you in education? Just out of curiosity.
I have no clue. We have never had that conversation, but I'm glad he did. Because it opened my eyes to so much that I had no clue as to what was happening and how things were being structured, pipelines that were being built. And it has totally reshaped how I do ministry and how I look beyond the surface to see how things are really being structured so that I can fight and speak truth to power and educate our people. As I run through my timeline on Facebook on a daily basis, It is very clear that people are just plain ignorant, IGNANT, about policy and how things really work behind the scenes. And they're promoting these poor people that are among us, are promoting policies and people that do not benefit them. Many of us are just 3 paychecks away from being homeless, but we're siding with billionaires who will never be.
Who don't care about us
They don't care about us. But we're so disillusioned and misconstrued and yeah, all of that. So we keep supporting stuff that hurts us.
Pastor Hatch, what do you say to the brokenhearted? Oh, I'm getting to the ministry of Jesus, right? What do we say? Because when I see these parents, even when they don't know how, Dr. Myers, they want what's best for their children. They might not know. My great grandmother could not read or write. She couldn't even sign an X. But on the day that I was born, when she heard that I got here, she went with her little stockings, rolled up, in a little knot on the side that you couldn't see. And she took out a policy for me to go to college. Because she said, this child's going to school. Praise the Lord. 20 odd years later, we got a letter from the insurance company. They said, you know what, the policy's still here. She paid on it. As God, I had full scholarships to college. I didn't even need it. But it made me cry, thinking that my great grandmother, she wanted that much. And we all come from people who want that much for us. And quite frankly, all Americans want that. That's why we're here. Black folks, we had a different route, but you know what? Reverend said we came over here on different ships, and we're in the same boat now. Everybody wants that. And these dreams, Pastor Hatch, are being taken from everybody. What do you say?
The concept is Sankofa, Santita, what you just described, your grandmother, that's how all of our families were.
Yeah.
We valued education above all. It was the one thing no one could take away. And somewhere we did lose our way where we began to celebrate ignorance. And it's like the more ignorant you were, the more black you were. Well, that's not the way I grew up. It's not the family I grew up in. It's not the church I grew up in. It was people who had very little education, who valued it. And that was such an important part of who we were. And we have to go back and reclaim that. And so we have to work, of course, on the macro level, with movements like, I'm not going to buy a doggone thing anywhere on Friday. So there's the macro struggle that we all participate in, and we look for guidance, with national leaders. But then all of us have to wage these fights on the local level, to reclaim who we were. Right on our block, we have a charter school started by a gentleman named Sam Finkelstein, who moved in our neighborhood with his own vision, without any regard to, the community. And we need them out of here. Their product is horrible. They squashed a story that reported that they expelled more students than any other CPS school in the city during the pandemic.
And the data shows that that's what they do.
Here in West Garfield Park. So we need them out. We're lining up African-American operators, people that we can work with as we build community. That's what churches do. We preach the gospel, we disciple, we build community. We preach the gospel, we disciple, we build community. And so, that's what we have to do on the local level. We have to build these institutions, build communities, and our local level, we're doing, community development, but we also have to get that charter school out of here and get an operator in here that's going to be responsive to the community, that hopefully will be of the community, that will have the kind of cultural competence to be partners with the rest of the community building efforts in this community. And again, where we can restore our culture, where we value education and we value trained mind. Your mother, her favorite scripture was was as a man soweth, as a man thinketh rather, so
So is
he
he.
is. That, yeah, I heard your mother say that 100 times, and that's the kind of intellectual development that our community valued when we had very little of anything else. So we got to reclaim that. I've shared with my children because my mom died when I was 8 years old.
Hmm.
She had a high school diploma, which at that time it was really high. I mean, you were cultured
Mhm.
when you went to high school. And I remember the night my mom died. I was 8, and I didn't know I wouldn't see her again. And she wanted to watch. I wanted to watch a Western, and we had that one TV. She wanted to watch Channel 11, the Chicago Symphony
Mhm.
Orchestra. And we were in the projects. And, as
Mhm.
I reflected on my mom and I shared it with my kids, my mom didn't speak with what they would call a Negro dialect. She
Absolutely.
was very cultured, and so I just remember, and that's who we were. And we had books everywhere, and we had the world book encyclopedias, and the yearbook we got every year was like having the internet in your home. And I learned about Soweto sitting on the floor reading
Mhm.
the World Yearbook uh, about the Southwest townships, in South Africa and the struggle. I learned that in the 60s in the projects because my mother filled our home with books and novels and culture and took us to museums. And we learned you didn't have to be rich to be wealthy.
Well,
And we were wealthy even in public housing. We have to reclaim the richness of our culture again.
yeah, because I learned that some of the wealthiest people are the most depraved. So there's so much for that. So
Must.
yeah, yeah, that's the truth. So I mean, and to me, when you look at Sammy Davis Jr., who didn't go to school, but his enunciation was perfect. It was when we had black owned businesses, black owned companies that promoted our culture. They promoted the best in us, Ebony and Jet. Now we have black oriented companies and black oriented products that pollute our minds. And I would say that in the broader culture, everybody, it goes with white people too. We're being polluted. There's a lot of wickedness out here. And we have to make a decision that enough is enough, that we're not going to do this anymore. And for white, black, brown, yellow, and red, what did my father say? Hey, you might have been born in the slum, but the slum does not have to have been born in you. And I say that to anyone. I'm not just saying that to black people. I'm saying that to everybody. Everybody. I'll let you have the last word, Dr. Myers, but you, Pastor Thurston. Oh, I've got Dr. LaShawn Latrice here. I want you to say something real quick because we got to get out of here. But I'm so glad that you're here. I didn't see you. But Dr. LaShawn Latrice, I'll let you have a word. But Pastor Thurston, what do you say? What do you see?
Yeah, I think another issue that we didn't get a chance to really touch on was this whole color blindness piece
Oh,
that the administration is pushing through, and we recognize that our schools segregated not by law but by this invisible hand of zoning, funding formulas, choice, and all that does is reveal this hollow promise of colorblind policies, and all of that is some BS. Um, to not see my color, but everything else in the world sees my color,
mm-hmm.
we can't play that game. And so I need us to be very aware of that language, that dog whistle language, and what it's really inferring.
Well, yeah, because you're telling me that my race is a problem. No, your racism is.
Right.
I see. I'm black. Black as the day is long, and I'm gonna be that, and I'm happy about that. How about that part? Huh? Yeah. Like you don't need to be blind to what I look like. Child, please. Me and all the blonde. I am as black as I can be. Yes. At my age, that's what happens. Doctor, look, I keep it 100. What? Okay. Dr. LaShawn Latrice, she is the community psychologist. Don't say anything else, anybody. Okay. Let you speak. Okay, Dr. Latrice. Okay, they're taking these civil rights away, the protections away from uh, when it covers race and gender. Talk to me. Dr. Latrice? Okay. Well, let me go to you, Dr. Myers.
I would say that I agree with all the panelists. What I would like to just remember that we're trying to create for ourselves and do better. When you talk about the community building that has to go on, the re-education of us that has to go on, the first thing you can do is, if you are a parent or a grandparent, you don't have to have a child in the school to be a member of the PTA.
Mm.
The local school, if it's a school around the corner from your house and you're there, go in there and join and or start a PTA organization to get involved and see what's happening in your local school. The second thing is, if you have time and you always got something to say, go to the school board meetings and then end up running for the school board, because that's where a lot of power lies. I'm being honest, because most people who should run for office never will.
Mhm.
And that's a travesty. That's a travesty. You don't, there are no real requirements for you to run for office. I mean, they are very, very minimal, especially when you look at municipal and then statewide state offices. So run for these local offices that actually effectuate change in your life on a daily basis, in the lives of our children. So school board, go to the meetings, go to, run for school board, understand who your school board members are so you can begin to engage and do that work. The third thing is, I will always, 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 always beg all the students that go to college, don't forget about being a teacher. You can do everything and be a teacher. Roberta Flack was a teacher before she was Roberta Flack. Erica Badu was a teacher before she was Erica Badu. So you think about people who have done so many things. It teaches you so much when you become an educator yourself. One thing I always say, especially with our community, Black and brown communities, we will always work education adjacent. We'll work for the Boys and Girls Club, for City Year, we'll serve food in the cafeteria. We will do all of those things. However, when it comes to becoming the teacher of record, that is where we don't show up in numbers and in full force. We've all seen what bad teaching looks like. Go in and help try to correct it. It's never too late for you to go into and help and to become a teacher. So that's the other thing I would say. And the other part is, make sure that we hold our own community-based organizations accountable and make sure that we are doing what we need to do to strengthen our community. We don't have to do it in a silo and by ourselves. It doesn't have to be just a Delta thing to do it. It could be AKAs together. It could be the Masons together, Eastern Stars, everybody, and the churches as well. We own a boatload of real estate when it comes to church, as in a building. Let's utilize those spaces, and those community organizations work through those spaces to do more for our community, and to do that Saturday school, to do that Freedom School training, to come down to Rainbow Push on Saturdays and make sure you work with Santita and Reverend to get these things going, because they will love the volunteerism. I'll tell you that. Everybody loves a volunteer. Come on down and help. So those are the things that I would say.
And
Nobody's
thank
going to
you.
turn you away. NAACP not going to turn you away either.
That's
So,
right.
these are ready-made places that you can plug in to organizations that exist and that have done this work. I get a lot of members of my NAACP. They go to the Freedom Fund dinner and everybody dress up and look good, but it's the same 15 people once a month on Saturday going to these meetings. So I need to see more people there that are involved and ready to hit the ground running and doing this work on a weekly basis to get us to where we need to go.
And thank you for giving it up for that Alpha Chapter Delta. My soror Alpha Chapter. That's right, the great Roberta Flack. I sang with her for 5 years. What a blessing that was. And what was wonderful was that she was a teacher. And every time you were with her, it was class. When we were going to be on tour for extended periods, it was nothing for you to be in rehearsals for 7 to 14 days, 8 hours a day. Her sound checks took 2 to 3 to 4 hours. Then you went to sing. And people would say, it sounds like the record. Well, that was on purpose. She was a teacher. And she was
And she believed in perfection.
She believed in that, but she also believed in bringing people in.
Yes.
And seeing the best in you and lifting that up. And I thank God that I had her in my life, and that I'll always have her in my life, and that you'll have her in yours, because that's really what it's about, everybody. I thank God for that. And so everybody, hey, let's save the children. That was our movie from the 1972 Expo. Save the children. Save the children. And if you save the children, you can raise up the adults that they become. So think about that, everybody. I love you. Dr. LaShawn Latrice, sending you much love. Pastor Marshall Hatch and the Ma'afa Redemption Project, sending you so much love. Reverend Dr. Marshall Hatch, please get over to his church, New Mount Pilgrim. It is a cathedral. It has the largest stained glass representations of the civil rights martyrs in the world. You've got to see it. It's absolutely stunning. When I looked and saw the 4 little girls, and all, I mean, it's absolutely stunning. Dr. Lakeisha Myers, our teacher in residence, sending you so much love. And Reverend Stephen Thurston, that's right, Morehouse and Oxford. Ow, love it. Dr. LaShawn Latrice, I gotta go now. But you know what, everybody? Sending you so much love. And hey, correctional officer for the lockdown, come on, go on to Howard. That's right, send these children to Howard. Oh yeah, but you know what? I love HBCUs, period. Because I know people who go to any of the schools in the AU complex. They love it. And Southern, Jackson State, North Carolina A&T, Lincoln, Central State. I mean, it's just something special about that HBCU experience. It is. It really, really is. And so, FAMU, I'm not going to forget about you, Dr. Latrice. I got you, boo. That's right. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson. Mwah. Sending you all so much love. May God bless you real good.